Right, very quickly, to give us some time to discuss our primary source documents, I'll say a little bit about religion in, well, briefly about Roman religion, but primarily we're aiming at getting an understanding of religion in Roman Britain. The Romans were polytheistic, which means prior to the adoption of Christianity, of course, they believed in the existence of more than one deity, of more than one god. And this, for a large part of history, has been the, prehistory is presumably the dominant form of religion. Only more recently have we seen monotheism becoming the predominant form of religious belief in the world. So the Romans believed in many gods, and to some extent, like many polytheistic peoples, they were relatively tolerant. It's only when you get monotheism that you get a higher degree of religious intolerance between groups, because they say this is the only god and yours is wrong, or something like that. But polytheistic peoples, and I wouldn't say this is 100% true, but in general, in the past, there's evidence that polytheistic peoples were often a little bit more tolerant or flexible when it came to encountering other polytheistic people. So, for example, they might say, well, we worship a sun god, and we call him this, and you also worship a sun god, but he has a different name, but really it's the same guy, okay? And so we're not going to argue too much about that, or whatever. Or else, as it often was the case, polytheistic systems will absorb the gods of other peoples into theirs. In fact, many of the Roman, what we call Roman gods, probably, I mean, particularly the planets, I think, originated amongst the Etruscans. I think that was something they took from their Etruscan rulers and predecessors in Italy and absorbed it into their system. So the main point to make is that they were polytheistic, but relatively flexible at the same time. So, for example, we get, as we shall see, a degree of tolerance of the native British Celtic, as we want to call it, Celtic religion in Roman Britain, and also other religious trends spreading and so on. So, for example, in the later period, particular, we see the mystery cult, which we now call Mithraism, spreading, perhaps having a more Eastern origin, and we even have evidence of this interesting religion in Roman Britain as well and other parts of the Roman world, becoming an important element in this kind of general mix. So the point I'm trying to make is this degree of flexibility and variety that we can see. Below the level of the big gods, the planet gods, Jupiter and so on and things like that, the Romans had a number, like many polytheistic peoples, they had a sort of number of layers and levels of gods and spiritual deities and things like this, down to the level, for example, of family gods, and they worshipped their ancestors and so on. Have you seen, I mean, everyone, well, I know it's quite an old film now, of course, but The Gladiator, you know, the people's heads flying all over the place and so on. There's a scene in that film, I think it's when they, really at the beginning, when they try and capture him and so on. He's in his tent and he's got those little figurines. Now, he's not just some little kid collecting figurines or something. These are presumably kind of effigies, images of his ancestors and things like that. And he being the main actor, being the pater familias, the head of the family. It was his job to remember his ancestors and so on and things like that. So,
in the Aztecs, for example, the legion in the Gallia region, I noticed every time every Roman soldier is worshipping another name, another god. They have many gods.
Yeah, okay, I haven't seen that, but yeah, is it the cartoon version or the okay, yeah, well, okay, I saw those 30 years ago or something, but not for a while. But yeah, okay, so we get the impression we've got a very big empire, and Britain obviously was a small part of that, And there was a lot of variety going on, both within Britain, but more importantly within the whole system and so on. The Romans brought things, they absorbed things, they tolerated local things and so on. And the Roman soldiers, of course, come from all over the place to be part of the army, so they'll bring their own practices and so on. Mithraism, I think, was quite common amongst the soldiers, for example. It was an important thing for them in that period. We see also, as a kind of political as well as religious element, the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor and deceased members of the imperial family and so on. Emperors seeing themselves as living gods and things like this. Okay, and this incorporates in the 3rd century the idea of the sun god Sol coming in. We've got the big gods, but also the emperors themselves. And this, as I said, had a political as well as a sort of religious significance as a way of kind of emphasizing the importance of the emperors. In Britain, as I mentioned before, the native British Celtic peoples, Britain and Ireland, were polytheistic as well. And they had their own gods, who were obviously to some extent similar and in other ways different from the Roman gods. And we have evidence that the native British gods were tolerated and even kind of combined in some cases with the Roman gods and so on. Here is an image of one of these guys that we've found and things like this. So until the advent and spread of Christianity, religion in Britain under Roman rule was very, very mixed. Then, of course, it's this gentleman, Constantine the Great, the Baba of Istanbul, who, in a sense, changes things. In 312, we have his conversion to Christianity, of which there is a certain amount of debate and so on exactly what he thought he was doing. He was a big follower of the sun god, Sol, and so exactly whether he became a perfectly good Christian overnight or whether it was a more gradual process is hard to see. But following his conversion, we see we see more toleration of this rather strange cult, Christianity, within the Roman world, and then we see the gradual spread of it elsewhere. We've seen evidence, as we discussed on Tuesday, that Christianity already existed in Britain before Constantine's time, okay, so it had spread within the British world. And here's one interesting point to make. The word in English and other languages for someone who is, well, not a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, for example, but is some kind of polytheistic believer, is that they are called a pagan. Okay, now that comes from a Latin word paganus, which doesn't have religious significance originally. Okay, it comes from pagus, which also gives things like the French word pays and so on, countryside, okay? So originally, Christianity was spreading in the Roman world within towns. The earliest converts in the early centuries prior to the time of Constantine to Christianity in the Roman world were primarily, not only, but primarily in the towns, okay? And so someone who was outside the town was likely to be still a polytheist, a non-Christian, and therefore a countryside man was a polytheist. And so the word for a countryman changes its meaning and becomes to mean a non-Christian in that sense. So originally meaning a country dweller, it ends up becoming, in modern languages, modern English, primarily to mean a non-Christian. Other side of that coin, urbanus, okay, doesn't have quite the same opposite connotation, but we do have the English word urbane, which indicates civilization and culture or something like that, which is what you find in the cities. Okay, urbs is the word for city, urban there. Okay. Okay, any questions before we move on to the Vindolanda tablets? Okay, let's escape from my PowerPoint show. Close this as well. And if you can get out, if you have your copies of the text I gave out, I've got a few spare copies if you forgot to bring it along with you. Have you all got your copy? Anyone didn't have their copy with them? Yeah, okay, I've got one more. And did you all get a chance to read the documents? I mean, there's a lot of pages, but half of it is in Latin, so you didn't need to read those. I don't think it amounts to too much reading, though whether it's easy reading and understandable. As another Zeynep, who's not here today, was saying, I read it, David, but I couldn't understand anything of what it was saying and things. So we'll have a go now together at perhaps understanding. This is the website. You can actually get the same texts plus more fuller notes and commentaries on the texts from this website. I had a quick look through that to give me a few ideas earlier on. Vindolanda was an auxiliary fort, a Roman fortress in the north of England. And let me just see if I've got a... Where is my map? My map of this Civitates, where is it here? Oh, I've closed that file, haven't I? So here is Hadrian's Wall. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, just near Hadrian's Wall. So very, very far up in the Roman military part of Britain. Archaeologists a few decades ago had the great luck to discover these documents at the site, which give a kind of snapshot of life in northern Britain at the end of the 1st century. So I guess roughly we're talking around about AD 90 to maybe sometime around about AD 20. So the end of the 1st century and the early part of the 2nd century is the period that we're dealing with primarily here. Here is, I hope, yes, the site itself of the fortress, and there was a small vicus nearby or outside the walls, I think. And here is an example of what these things looked like. This one is a fairly complete one, the two parts together. Sometimes you only have one half of the document surviving. Most of the documents that we're going to be looking at and discussing were wooden tablets. The Romans had a number of ways of communicating with each other, including engraving onto wax, for example. Here we have very thin leaves of wood, usually two parts that would then be closed up to protect the writing, and then as letters or documents they'd be sent to someone else, and so on. And in some cases we have the two parts, in some cases we only have one half of the diptych surviving. Okay, this is one of the ones we've looked at, the invitation to the birthday party. We might, in fact, look at that. Now, you're probably thinking, what the heck is this stuff here? I can't understand this writing at all. This is called Old Roman cursive. The letters we use to write English, but also Turkish and Polish, of course, to a large extent, are based on the Roman alphabet, which has its own history back. And cursive is something where you write things very quickly, okay, or you connect letters up and so on. So if I wrote this, I'm deliberately writing in capitals so that you can see what I'm writing. But if I was writing my own handwriting, okay, that's how I write to myself, okay? And apart from seeing the dot there, so you're guessing there's an I, or whatever, that would be completely illegible, I suspect, to most of you. So what happened was, to write these letters, they began writing them quickly and bending them over and things like that. And then you end up with this system, which existed in the early part of the Roman Empire. Then you have a new Roman cursive coming in later on. So I'm not going to ask you to have a read of these, because I can't even work out what that's saying. But we've got the translated versions here, which is the best thing. Now, before we start, I want us to think a little bit about how historians can approach written sources, how we can approach documents of one sort or another. This is a common and rather well-used analogy, but I still think it's a good one, which is why it's common. Studying history properly, where you're using primary sources, not just reading someone's article or textbook or something, but doing real history, which is what we're going to do for the next 40 minutes or so, I hope, is similar in a way to solving a crime or a mystery or something like that. Okay, you have witnesses, people who say this happened, that happened. In our case, we have written documents which are equivalent to witnesses, and from the varying testimonies of these witnesses, we try to understand what the society was like or what happened and things like that. Now, the problem is we don't always have all the witnesses. People don't always come forward to say, oh, I saw what happened, and we don't, as historians, have every single document surviving to our time. And often the witnesses we do have, the documents we do have, are for one reason or another biases. They're bending the truth. They're telling complete lies. They're twisting things and things like that. So the one thing we can't do is sit down and say, okay, this is what it says, and this is what it was like. This is what happened, okay? We can't take things as their face value automatically. In some cases, you can argue this is a very straightforward document. It tells us this and that, and perhaps we can believe that. But in many cases, we have to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more suspicious, and think about the document itself before we actually try and use it to reconstruct history. So let's talk a little bit about some of the points we have to think about there. Now, firstly, we could think about typology. What type of document? What kind of document do we have? Now, in the Vindolanda examples, we have, for example, things which are what we might call administrative records. They're just recording statistics, debts, and things like that. Okay. We also have letters, and it clearly states this is written from X to Y. Okay. Now, those are two very, very different kinds of source. Even the administrative records we can't trust 100%, but they're often written with the purpose of just recording facts so that you don't have to remember them, okay, or conveying those facts to someone else. However, letters are far more personal, okay, and the phrasing, the forms of Latin and so on that people use are often, as we'll see, we won't look at the Latin, but the phraseology and the things they talk about are more personal. So let's take letters as an example. A modern kind of letter is an email, of course. If I was sending an email to my dad back in North Wales, I would write about things in a certain way, okay, the way that I communicate with my dad. If I were writing to one of you, then I would write about the same topic maybe, but clearly in a slightly different kind of way. And the things I would say would be different. If I was emailing, I don't know, the rector of the university, again, it will have another level of formality and so on. So with something like a letter, we need to know who the writer is and who's the recipient, and in a sense, what's their relationship, what's the connection between them, because these things determine in a very strong way what they speak about and how they convey their ideas about that subject, and what things they're going to say and what things they're going to leave out and so on. And this kind of thing we need to think about for all documents. Who's writing it and why? Okay? These people didn't just sit down and think, oh, in September 2009, some guy and a few other students are going to sit together and they want to study the past, so let's put some documents together for their benefit, okay? They were not doing this, for the most part, for our retrospective benefit in order to understand their society, though some people may have had that motivation. They had other more immediate, more personal reasons for doing things, and understanding the purpose, the function of a document will also tell us a little bit about how we should read it and so on. Okay? If it's trying to persuade someone about something, it will twist facts perhaps to push people in that way and so on. In the same way that witnesses in crime trials or whatever will again be economical with the truth if they're trying to save their friend or save themselves and so on and things like that. So I'm not saying we have to be kind of completely suspicious and just throw things away, but we have to be somewhat cautious as we approach our historical sources. I think that's very, very important. Okay, any questions there? Anything? No? Okay, so we've got here our collection or selection from the tablets. We've got our letters, we've got our more mundane records and things like that. They're very, very important, as I said, because for the most part we don't have this kind of source from Roman Britain. Britain was on the kind of edge of the Roman world, and here from the very edge of Roman Britain we have a very valuable collection of sources which tell us about the life of this community of people and so on. So let's begin very, very broadly, and then we'll perhaps focus in onto a number of questions thereafter. If this was all you had, if this was the only source you had for Roman Britain, okay, what kind of history could we perhaps write? What kind of history could we write from using these sources? What things could we understand about this society, and therefore by implication perhaps the bigger society of Roman Britain? We have got other sources, but sorry, go on.
Military side of the Roman press in Britain, I think, is the most detailed perception that we would get from this legal.
Yeah, okay, so this is a military community, it's a fortress, it contains soldiers, it has its prefect, and so on. So by definition, we can begin perhaps looking at the military organization of that community and the way it works and so on, and then we can branch out beyond that and so on. But it's a starting point, that's true.
If you look at daily life, just seeing the type of clothing, type of materials they would have used, how much things cost. There's everything in there about that.
Yes, I mean, as I said last time, it's not perhaps the most interesting of things to read, just lists of prices or whatever it is, but for some kinds of historians especially, very, very important kinds of source. So, yeah, we can reconstruct the life of these people to some extent from the things they ate, the things they wore, and so on, and things like that. On a very kind of physical level, these things are recorded. What about the people themselves? Think about...
Still really awfully, I mean, once again, you could see what they were using, but as far about the people themselves, the lists really don't know everything. You have to look through the letters for that.
Right, okay. Yeah, I'm throwing the question out for all documents, not just for the lists and so on. But the lists are quite useful. I saw lists of different kinds of people. If we wanted to reconstruct who was there, for example, we want to say, okay, who were the people living in and near this fortress in the north of Roman Britain at around about the year 100 or something, then all the documents we've got here, and obviously the many others that we don't have in this selection, would, I think, be very, very useful, okay?
106 lists some occupations, shoemakers, builders, their systems are hospitals, so possibly, I wouldn't go as far as to say doctors that far back then, but people dealing with medicines.
Right, okay, yes.
Social life also. I guess in the internet there's an invitation of one of the wife of the soldiers to another person. Birthday invitation.
Yeah, okay, well, okay, let's look at that. That's the one we've got here. And where is it now? It's one of the letters, it's one of the important ones here. Okay, it's on page 127. Let's look at that one, okay? Though we're perhaps jumping ahead of ourselves here. Birthday invitation of Claudia Severa to Sulpicia Lepidina. Claudia Severa to her Lepidina greetings. On the third day before the Ides of September, that'll be 10th or 11th of September, I think. Sister, for the day of the celebration of my birthday, I give you a warm invitation to make sure that you come to us and make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival. If you are present, and they're not, the question mark there means they're not clear about the text. There's parts of the text missing and things like that. Give my greetings to your Kyrialis. My Aelius and my little son send him their greetings. I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper and hail. And then there's a change of hands there, it says, which I wouldn't recognize myself from here, but I think a scribe wrote most of it, but where it says second hand, that might actually be Claudia Severa herself writing, I think they think. And then it says to Sulpicia Lepina, wife of Kyrialis, who was the prefect. This is this guy who comes up in lots of the documents. So the wife of the kind of commander of the fort at that time is being invited by a female friend to her birthday. I'm not sure if we know whether it was taking place in the fortress or presumably elsewhere, I suspect, otherwise you wouldn't actually have to write a letter. So it's a similar kind of community elsewhere. Okay, let's take this one document. What can we say about this? What does this reveal to us? A few interesting and important things.
Well, you can see that the people are of high standing because they have the luxury to be able to throw a party, send letters to one another to invite people, and they gotta have money.
Okay. It may not be the biggest party in the world, but it was still something. They were trying to have a kind of civilized life and so on. I mean, firstly, the important thing, one of the interesting things about this document is that it's written by a woman to another woman. Okay. So, firstly, we can see that there were women present in these military communities in northern Britain. They were not British women, they were Romans of one sort or another, but it's not just the soldiers and their commanders there, but there are also women and children present, okay? My little son as well, it says, and so on. I don't know exactly who Aelius is, but it indicates clearly that this is not just a male military community, but it has, at least up to a point, obviously these are the most high-standing women. I don't think, until a certain point later than this, I don't think normal Roman legionary soldiers were permitted to marry. They were supposed to be single, and then when they became veterans, they could marry and settle in these colonies, as we mentioned before. So it may not have been that there were many women in these communities, just the women of the leaders and so on. Just as the guy in The Gladiator, in that case he leaves his wife behind when he's campaigning or whatever, but he was married because he was a general or something. But again, Kyrialis, the prefect, the commander, has his wife and children there with him. So on a very basic level, we've got women there, and we've got women who possibly were literate as well, who are writing at least part of this document and so on. And there's another letter, yes, on the next page, okay, we have, again, the same two ladies in communication. And she says somewhere in the middle there, you will receive my letters, okay? So these two ladies were in regular communication Okay, they were close friends up to a point, if physically separated, and they communicated by writing. So this indicates a level of kind of literacy and literary communication within these people in the north of England. So we've got lots of soldiers coming into, of various sorts, coming in the documents. Okay, obviously we've got the centurions mentioned a lot. What other kind of people, apart from ladies and children and the commander, what other kind of people crop in these documents? Whether the letters or the slaves come up, even letters written by slaves. At least one or two examples that we've got here where we've got a servus, a servant, literally I suppose, but it means slave, someone who was not free. And they've got jobs to do for their masters and so on, and they're communicating between each other to get these things done. So you had free people, you also had unfree as part of this community, and that's a common element in the early Roman world. I think one of the later and more interesting documents has been interpreted, but they're not 100% certain, in a certain way. Now, yes, on the last page, if you go to 139, it starts off somewhat incomplete, and they're not sure exactly how to translate things, but it says, "He beat me all the more, ... goods, or pour them down the drain." And I don't know what that all's going on about. "As befits an honest man, I implore your majesty." Now, it's been suggested, I think, that this might have been intended to be sent to the governor. You're using the word majesty there. Would not be a centurion or your prefect either. It might be someone higher up. "I implore your majesty not to allow me, an innocent man, to have been beaten with rods, and my lord, inasmuch as I was unable to complain to the prefect," okay, so it's definitely someone above the prefect, "because he was detained by ill health, I have complained in vain to the beneficarius and the rest of the centurions of his unit. I accordingly implore your mercifulness not to allow me, a man from overseas, and an innocent one, about whose good faith you may inquire, to have been bloodied by rods as if I had committed some crime." So some poor guy has got beaten up. Okay, now, okay, violence is just part of the world, I suppose, and so on, but it does show that these kind of things were going on there as well. And we'd have no idea what the reason was. And he's obviously claiming innocence, which of course he ought to do, he would do, I suppose. But and he's appealing initially to the prefect of the, presumably of the fort, but then he's even going perhaps to the governor to try and put forward his case. He says, "A man from overseas," okay, transmarinus, it would be transmarinum we have there. Now exactly what that means is not clear, whether it means he's come recently from overseas or whether he's just saying, "I'm not British, I'm a Roman, so I should be treated differently." We could perhaps interpret that in various ways. But the scholars who've studied this one suggest that this person is probably not a soldier. He's not a member of the military part of the community. He's possibly some kind of trader or something. And their transmarinus might be someone who's trading from abroad, coming from abroad to here. So this and a few other references indicate that there were also other kinds of civilian, non-military people spending at least some time at the community for, in this case, commercial purposes as well. So as we saw earlier when we looked at the fortresses and we talked about the suburban development, they had their primary military function, okay, and here we are very close to Hadrian's Wall, so obviously very important military function for this auxiliary garrison based there. But in addition, we see it's a bigger community, not just a simple military one. We see women, we see outsiders, slaves, and traders and other people all coming together and communicating and working together in order to support primarily the fortress, but having their own purposes as well. Okay, is there any particular documents you'd like to look at? Anything else? I mean, the birthday one and the beating with rods one were the two that struck me as particularly kind of, I suppose, novel or interesting. Okay, let's look at page 106. There's a little short thing here. It suggests it might be a memorandum about the Britons. Okay, it's a very short thing. I don't know whether it's from a longer document or whether it was originally short. The Britons, Britones, are unprotected by armour. They are very many cavalry. I'm not reading, but equites, cavalry, so that's mounted soldiers. The cavalry do not use swords, nor do the wretched Britons, this is our Britunculi, mount in order to throw javelins. Now, what's the purpose of this? What's this document trying to do you think? What's this strange little document? Apart from the interesting fact that it gives us this possible nickname for the Britons.
Military reconnaissance, maybe? Giving someone with higher ranking some information on the enemy?
Well, yeah, reconnaissance is a good idea.
There's a derogatory, I think, manner, attitude, maybe.
Well, yeah, if we've got, yeah.
They treat British people different, I guess.
I mean, for me, from all the samples we got, I think this is the only reference, explicit reference to the British there at all. Okay, so they are pretty much silent in these documents. It's very interesting. Here is a community of, well, there may have been people who were Romanized Britons there, but here is a community of Roman conquerors and their supporters, family and traders and so on, based in the north of England, as it is now. And their purpose is to deal with the local Britons, the people beyond the wall and presumably people nearby as well. And very rarely do they actually get mentioned in the documents at all. Okay, they're outside the perspective of these things. So, and when they do crop up, as you say, it seems to be a sort of negative, derogatory tone and so on. We could be giving advice. It seems to be you're passing on, as you say, reconnaissance information, giving someone else some key to how to, what to expect should they actually have to fight the Britons in some way, perhaps, and things like that. So they don't use armour, okay, and when they're throwing their spears, the javelins, they don't actually go on the horses and things like that. So it's a short thing, but it looks like at least someone was thinking about what the Britons were like and what they were up to, and so on. There were a number of letters in here which we'd almost take as like the equivalent of modern reference letters. Every year people come to me and say, oh, David, I'm applying to a university in the United States. Can you write me a letter? And things like that. And I follow a very regular format of how I can recommend, support my ex-students or current students in their application and so on. And this is part of a kind of network, academic network system of how we do things. And we see here at least one or two examples where, from what I can see, the purpose of the letter is just to recommend one person to another. Okay, it's a kind of networking system of promotion or advancement within the society, if not within the kind of not within the military system. Okay, the example is on, I found, page 124, but it's going on, the text is on 125. Did you find a different one, or is it the same one? Yeah, okay. Letter of recommendation. They think now the Eus that's got chopped off might be Claudius Carus, who's mentioned in some other documents. So Claudius Carus to his Cerialis, greetings. Brigionus, they're not sure exactly, but that's what they've got here, has requested me, my lord, to recommend him to you. I therefore ask, my lord, if you would be willing to support him in what he has requested of you. I ask that you think fit to commend him to Annia Sequester, centurion in charge of the legion at Luguvalium, by doing which you will place me in debt to you both in his name and my own. I pray that you are enjoying the best of fortune and are in good health. And then a second hand, perhaps the hand of the actual requester, writer, farewell brother, and then it says to Cerialis prefect. So someone writing to the prefect at Vindolanda on behalf of someone else, kind of recommending this guy to be recommended to a third party. Okay, so it's kind of, will you look after him and then say nice things about him to this centurion in a different fort elsewhere, presumably in the north. And I think there are one or two other examples of this kind of thing. So the purpose of these letters is obviously, as in my letters when I write reference letters for my students, is to say nice things about someone and to be rather formal, okay, to expect a positive response in that sense. Any other comments about this one? Because I found it quite interesting that this is the way that people would kind of move around and get on and things like that. There were no formal advertisements for jobs in newspapers or on the internet, and you got on through who you knew and who they could refer you to and so on, I suppose. Yes, yeah, it's a common thing, okay, and it's not too different today. We just formalised it in a slightly different way, I suppose. I'm trying to find the letter by the slaves. Where is the slaves' letter? Which page that is on? I should have jotted these things down. Number 26. Oh yes, number 25, page 130, that's right, thanks. Severus to his Candidus greetings. Regarding the blah blah blah, I don't know, for the Saturnalia, I ask you, brother, to see to them at a price of 4 or 6 asses and radishes. I don't know what the Turkish word for radish is. It's a kind of small, hard vegetable that grows under the ground with a red colour. To the value of not less than half a denarius. Farewell, brother, back to Candidus, slave of Genialis the prefect, from Sir Severus, slave of ... We don't find out who he is, okay, but the word servus, as I mentioned earlier, is used here. So they're dealing with some commercial transaction, negotiating prices, as I said, presumably on behalf of their masters and so on. So these are not personal letters as kind of business letters, I suppose. So we've had private letters, letters of recommendation, but also more business letters here that we've got. Anything else? Any other comments you wish to make? I'm noticing the time is running out. I want to talk a bit about next week, so we'll have to stop in a minute. But as interesting as some of these documents are, and as not so interesting as some of the others are, they still give us, as I said, a kind of snapshot, fairly unique picture of life in the military part of Roman Britain round about the year 100. And all the problems of interpreting and reading and the fact that they're all broken up and so on makes it impossible in some cases to be 100% sure of what they mean, but still an important source for us. Okay, to finish off, I'll give you bibliography material for next week. Now, of course, we don't have a class... Oh, take one for Azra, yes. We have no class on Tuesday because we have the Bairam holiday, but we will meet again on Thursday. What we're going to be doing is looking at, again, the very late Roman period and the very early post-Roman or sub-Roman period, so primarily the 5th and 6th centuries, when we saw the end of Roman military and administrative presence in Britain, but also the migration of Germanic peoples into Britain from the continent and the movement of Celtic peoples around the British Isles as well, as the structures and controls changed, then people move in, and we see the beginnings of the emergence of new forms of political organisation which become the post-Roman kingdoms that we'll follow up a little bit later on. So I've given you again a select bibliography. Okay, some of the things from our Roman Britain bibliography and the topics would be relevant there, books on late and articles on late Roman Britain, but I've got here a selection of important works that point to the situation and how we study this very dark but interesting period. What I want all of you to do for next week, or possibly maybe on Tuesday when we get round to the following Tuesday when we discuss this topic together, is to have a go at reading one, or if possible, the 3 articles that I've mentioned here. And again, I think we discussed at least one of them last year in the prep class. The genetic stuff. Okay. As I said at the start of the course, in addition to using written and physical resources, we can also study the past by using modern and also ancient genetic evidence. We can reconstruct the movements of people according to the present day patterns of gene distribution and so on. So for the past few years, geneticists and to some extent historians working together have been trying to interpret genetic information to understand the movement of Anglo-Saxons and other peoples during this period. So I've set the articles out chronologically. So the one by Michael Wheel and others was published first. Then, again, numerous authors, but I've just put the first one here, Christian Capelli, the Y chromosome census the British Isles, published a little bit later. And then slightly later, a new way of interpreting the evidence set out by it shall be Mark Thomas et al. I haven't got the other authors there, sorry about that. They're all on the web. You can just type in those URLs or search for these titles if you don't want to type in the URL, and then you can download those pages or read them online if you prefer yourselves. If there's a problem with any of these links or something, you can send me a mail and I'll try and send them back to you. So, a few words of warning. These articles, particularly the first 2, are written by and for molecular biologists, by scientists, so they're not written necessarily for a non-scientific audience. They follow a certain pattern, so you'll understand the first page or so, because they'll set out the problem. You can read the conclusion and to some extent the discussion at the end, but the middle section of at least the first article will just be kind of completely technical stuff about different kinds of haplotypes and things like that. Now I don't think, oh, I'm stupid because I can't understand that, because I can't understand it either, but you can get a general sense of what they're trying to argue and how they're trying to argue their case by looking at the first and latter part of the articles especially. I think the third article is set out slightly more conventionally as well. Okay, lastly, is there anyone who would like to give a presentation for...
I don't like to give, but I want to give my topic.
Well, okay, that's for this topic. I'm saying, is anyone who would like to talk about Anglo-Saxon migrations, early Celtic kingdoms, or something like that? Maybe speaking next Thursday, so you'll have 1 week, which includes obviously the Bayram period. So Özge, you're interested, yes? Okay. Let me put your name down then, and then we'll have to have a little chat in order to sort out the details and things like that, because there's a series of topics and problems here and so on. And you've done a bit of this before from last year, so...
Is the library open at Bayram, by the way?
Yes. I shall be taking a box of chocolates in for the hard-working staff who will be working during those days, hopefully tomorrow. Some of the departments will be closing, and we may be closing a bit early, but only on one day. Which day is it going to be? We're going to close on the main Bayram day. Okay, we close for the two big Bayram days and New Year's Day, but over the weekend we're going to be open, yeah, but not all the time. Okay, we can talk about your topic if you want afterwards, that's another thing. Okay, have a good holiday, hard working if otherwise. See you all on Thursday next week. If you've got any questions or problems, you can let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in a week's time.